Hello, everyone. Welcome back. In this section, we are going to start off with talking about temperament. And so, of course, what we always do when we have a new topic is define the topic. So, the first question is, what is temperament? So, I want you all to think of temperament in terms of the weather and the seasons. Think of emotions and temperament as weather and season. So you think about the emotion that someone has is displaying during a social interaction, that would be the day's weather. But when we're talking about temperament that would be explained as thinking about a season. And think about a season, you may have some better days than others, but overall, for example, winter it usually is cold. It may have hotter days, it may have very cold days, but overall, winter is cold. And think about, at least in in Chicago, and think about the weather. Like I said, the weather can change possibly from day to day, but on average, in a season, the weather is about the same. So we think about temperament. That temperament is someone's behavioral style, how they act, the emotions that they usually display, and how they respond to different situations. All of that will be a part of someone's temperament. And you can measure temperament usually through two avenues. The first is through questionnaires. In questionnaires, usually when we're talking about children's temperament, those questionnaires will be answered by the parents. And we also have clinical interviews, which most of the time you can have a social worker or a psychologist that interviews the children and the parents as well. And so we think about temperament. You can also think about how quickly children show emotion, how long it lasts, and how quickly it fades away. And I want us to really take a deep dive into temperament. So we're going to talk about the 9 dimensions of temperament. And you're actually going to use this for your next assignment. So the first dimension of temperament that we're going to discuss is activity level. And when we talk about activity level, that is the proportion that children have periods that they are active compared to periods where they are inactive. So you can have babies that are very active all the time, that most of the time they're active. You can also have babies that are not as active. They can be, more chill, more, they can be more quiet. They can not move around as much. They can be just very calm compared to other children that may have to just always be doing something. The second dimension that we're going to discuss is rhythmicity. And rhythmicity is the regularity of body functions. So think about, do children eat on a regular basis? Or if they may not eat on a regular basis, they may not have a set schedule to eat. I know I asked my mom about me sleeping when I was a child, and she said I did not have a predictable sleeping schedule. Even I think of myself now, I don't have a predictable sleeping schedule, and so that rhythmicity, it would be lower for me. But some children, they have a set sleep schedule, they have a set eating schedule, a set bowel movement schedule. All of that will be a part of rhythmicity. The next dimension is distractibility. So, for example, you may have a baby who is in the car and they are hungry, but there is no milk, there's no formula. The mom may not be present, and so with distractibility, can you distract a baby with a toy to get them from crying and getting distressed? Keep them distracted from them being hungry until you are able to provide them with food. So are you able to alter a baby's behavior, at least for a certain amount of time until you're able to provide them with what they need? Number 4 is approach or withdrawal. And this is, does an infant respond to a new object or person well? Do they, fully embrace being with a new person, or are they slow to warm up with a new person or a new toy? All of those would be the first four dimensions of temperament. And so we're going to get into the next five. The first is adaptability. Adaptability is asking if children are able to adapt to changes in the environment or the routine. So you may have a time where children have a set time where they eat, but you may have to change the time that they eat. Maybe a couple days a week, maybe because you get home early or you get home late. Does the child adapt well to that? Are they able to take it in stride, or do they have issues with changes in routines? Adaptability is also something when we're talking about children that have autism. A lot of times they have issues with changes in the environment or changes in the routine, sudden changes in routine and environment. So that's something to look out for. Number 6, the attention span or persistence. Are children able to devote a certain amount of time to an activity? Are they able to play with a toy for a long time, or do they just play with a toy for a minute and then move on to the next thing? Number 7, intensity of reaction. We think about children, like I said, children's emotions are not in a vacuum. They have to deal with social interactions. If they do not get their way, for example, in the intensity of reactions, is the intensity of the reaction more than what it should be? Is it just right? Are they able to calm themselves down? Do they have to cry for several hours if you take a toy from them? That intensity of reaction or energy level is important when we're talking about temperament. Number 8, threshold or responsiveness. Do you have to stimulate the child a lot to evoke a response? Or do you have to just look at them and they may cry? Or do you have to just look at them and they be able to change their behavior? Or do you have to really do a lot in order for them to change their behavior? That would be threshold of responsiveness. And then you have quality of mood, and that is just saying, are children usually in a positive mood or are they in a negative mood? So those are the 9 dimensions of temperament. For your assignment, you will ask your parents or your caregivers about these dimensions of temperament, but you're going to ask them about you, and then you're going to write about it. So I'm also going to have a video that specifically talks about each dimension. But yeah, this will be what you will use. And so we talked about the 9 dimensions of temperament. Where these 9 dimensions of temperament came from is the Chess and Thomas. They had this temperament study in 1956. They actually follow 141 children in New York, and it was a longitudinal study, so they followed them throughout their lifetime from early infancy to adulthood, which is a really long time. And based on the 9 dimensions that we just talked about, they were able to cluster or put together some characteristics to come up with 3 types of children. So they said that about 40% of the children that they followed in the study had an easy temperament. About 15% had a temperament where they were slow to warm up, and 10% had a temperament of a difficulty temperament, and about 35% were unclassified. Unclassified children were just children that had a unique blend of all of the characteristics, so they didn't fit easily into one category. So we're first going to talk about children that had an easy temperament. And as I talk about these temperaments, think about what you know about yourself growing up, or if you have nieces or nephews, sons, daughters, think about how you would categorize them according to Thomas and Chess. So as I said, easy children, they saw about 40% of the children in their study were easy children, meaning that they had usually a positive mood compared to a more negative mood. They had were able to establish routines quickly. They were generally cheerful, and they were easily able to adapt to new experiences. But we also have people or children that are slow to warm up, and about 15% of children were slow to warm up. So when these children were slow to warm up, they had negative moods. Not only were they negative in mood, but they slowly adjust when they were faced with new experiences. They were inactive, and they had low key reactions to stimuli, meaning that were when they were had stimuli available to them, they did not react as someone that enjoyed the stimuli. It was just kind of mellow. And they also later down the line, when the children were in preschool and older, they also had issues during those ages. They had excessive fearfulness. They were slow, and it had slow and constricted behavior when they were expected to respond actively and quickly in classrooms and peer groups. So this temperament is something that is it has something to it in regards to this Thomas and Chess study and how that could possibly affect a child later down the line. There were also children that were labeled as difficult. And this is a hilarious meme. I'm irritable and erratic in sleeping. I'm difficult in temperament. These children had irregular routines. They were slow to adapt. When they did react to stimuli, they reacted negatively. And this difficult children label was predictive of later behavior problems. So that is Thomas and Chess, their understanding of temperament. And now we're going to get into goodness of fit. When we talk about temperament, that is goodness of fit is a continuation of temperament. Goodness of fit is when there is a match between parents' child rearing practices, and a child's temperament. When you have a match between child rearing practices and a child's temperament, that leads to favorable adjustment. So when we think about Matilda, the movie Matilda, that was a lack of fit. That was not a goodness of fit, because their child rearing practices did not match Matilda's temperament. And you can even think about children that may be a little bit more active compared to other children. If they have parents that are also active and engaging with the child, then that's a goodness of fit. But if you have children that are very active and they have parents that are not active, that don't want to take time to play with them, then that is a lack of fit. So that would be an example of a lack of fit. So again, two parts of goodness of fit: parents' child rearing practices and the child's temperament. And a lot of parents don't actually understand temperament until they actually have another child. So what happens is that parents have the first child, but they feel like the child's behavior is a result of how they treated their first child. Then they have a second child, and they try the same techniques that they used for the first child. So they may have tried the same sleeping techniques, the same feeding techniques, and they figure out that these techniques are not as effective with the second child compared to the first child. And the reason why these same techniques are not useful for the second child compared to the first child is because there is a difference in temperament. And I want you all to understand this slide because this is going to be on the quiz. So I'm giving you all a hint. All right, so I'm going to see you all on the next slideshow.